Imagine waking up tomorrow, and the entire financial world looks exactly the same on the surface. Calm, confident, unstoppable. Yet underneath, it's already breaking. Because that's exactly what happened once before. And the story we think we know about 1929 is only the trailer, not the full movie. Back then, the world was partying on borrowed euphoria. A stock market everyone believed could never fall. Ordinary Americans, teachers, factory workers, farmers, suddenly felt like Wall Street insiders. They weren't investing. They were gambling with money that didn't exist. Margin loans exploded. Newspapers bragged about a permanent prosperity. Politicians pounded the table, promising endless growth. And the country believed it. They believed they were witnessing the birth of a brand new era, a money machine that could only spin upward. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Behind the champagne bubbles and ticker tape was a financial structure held together by nothing but optimism, leverage, and wishful thinking. Debt stacked on debt. Banks approving loans they knew were reckless. Companies inflating earnings to keep the illusion alive. Families buying cars, radios, and homes on installments because everyone assumed tomorrow would be richer than today. It wasn't just a bubble. It was a culture built on the idea that risk no longer existed. And just like every financial fantasy in history, it only took one spark. October 1929. A whisper turned into fear. Fear turned into selling. Selling turned into an avalanche. In a matter of days, fortunes evaporated. Entire companies imploded. The invincible financial system cracked open like a hollow shell. But here's the part your history teacher never told you. The crash wasn't the disease. It was the fever. The real infection was deeper. Too much debt, too little real income, too much faith in rising markets. And if any of this sounds familiar, it should. Because the same pressure points from 1929 are quietly pulsing inside the modern economy. They just wear different names. Instead of telegrams and ticker tape, we have trading apps and crypto dashboards glowing at 2 a.m. Instead of margin loans, we have credit cards charging 25% interest, mortgages stretching 30 to 40 years, governments running trillion-dollar deficits. Instead of installment radios, we have buy now, pay later for groceries. The psychology is identical. The illusion just looks prettier. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern economies run on confidence. Confidence is the fuel. Borrowing is the engine. Consumption is the motion. But confidence can vanish instantly. When people believe the system is safe, they spend, invest, and borrow like tomorrow is guaranteed. When doubt creeps in, everything freezes. That's what happened in 1929. Not because the world ran out of money, but because it ran out of trust. Now look at today. Global debt, over 3 times the entire world's GDP. Households drowning in loans. Corporations rolling over billions in obligations they can barely service. Governments printing at record speed whenever the machine starts to shake. It's the same script, upgraded for a globalized, hyper-connected, high-velocity century. Banks in the 1920s sold bad loans and called them opportunity. Today, they do it with exotic derivatives, structured products, and financial engineering with names so confusing, they're designed to keep you from realizing the risk. Inequality? Worse now than before the Great Depression. The top 1% owns more than the bottom 90%. Wages stagnate while housing sprints away from the middle class like a horse escaping a burning barn. Families plug the gap with credit, hoping the future will bail them out. Even central banks are replaying the same moves. In the 1920s, they kept interest rates low to fuel growth, then slammed them higher when inflation clawed its way in. The result? Credit strangled, panic ignited, collapse followed. Sound familiar? Today's central banks are walking the same tightrope. Print money to keep markets alive or raise rates to cool inflation. Knowing either choice detonates something. In speculation, that hasn't changed in 100 years. In 1929, people bought stocks they barely understood because everyone's getting rich. In 2025, it's meme stocks, NFTs, crypto spikes that look like heart attacks on a chart. The names evolve. The human psychology never does. The Great Depression revealed a brutal truth the world hated hearing. And when systems become too unequal, too leveraged, and too dependent on belief, they collapse under their own weight. And here we are again. Only now the stakes are exponentially higher. Because the financial system today isn't just national, it's global. In 1929, one country fell, and the shockwaves circled the planet slowly. Today, one crack in one market can ricochet across continents in seconds. That's the world we're standing in, a giant interconnected machine power. What happened in 1929 wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a collapse of imagination. People didn't just lose money, they lost the ability to believe the system could ever fail. They were hypnotized by prosperity, convinced the good times were permanent, certain they were living in an age where downturns were impossible. Sound familiar? Because we're running the same playbook today. Trusting central banks, trusting politicians, trusting the narrative that everything is under control. But stability built on debt, speculation, and psychological comfort isn't stability. It's a countdown disguised as confidence. It's borrowed time wearing a mask of certainty. The truth is brutal. The lesson of 1929 wasn't learned. It was buried. Every generation thinks it's smarter than the last, that they've engineered a safer machine, that their models, their data, their technology make them untouchable. But the patterns don't care about ego. They care about leverage. The Great Depression didn't begin with catastrophe. It began with a handful of bad market days, a little panic, a few cracks. But once trust evaporated, the panic metastasized. Banks failed by the thousands. Homes were lost in waves. Entire cities lined up for food. What started as a financial hiccup morphed into a decade-long wound that reshaped the world. The danger today isn't that history might repeat. It's that we might repeat history. And if the same forces are building again, we have to ask the question nobody wants to face. What happens when today's illusion breaks? Because by the early 1930s, the illusion wasn't just dented, it was obliterated. Bank runs wrapped around corners like misery itself had formed a queue. Savings vanished overnight. Families watched their futures dissolve in real time. The crisis jumped from Wall Street to Main Street to every street. Governments panicked, and in their panic, they made it worse. They cut spending when they should have supported the economy. They raised tariffs when cooperation was needed most. They tightened budgets while unemployment exploded. Their fear of short-term pain helped create long-term devastation. The collapse became global, political, generational. And here's the uncomfortable echo. The remedies leaders reach for today are the same as a century ago. They print money, they cut rates, they patch symptoms instead of treating causes. The global economy now floats on debt so massive it will never be repaid. A balloon kept in the air by central banks and the collective belief that it'll all work out. But belief is fragile. When it snaps violently. Let's talk about speculation, because that's where the ghosts of 1929 scream the loudest. In the 1920s, leverage was gasoline. People were borrowing 90% of the value of the stocks they bought. A tiny drop in prices triggered margin calls, forcing even more selling, creating a self-feeding death spiral. Today, leverage is everywhere, just hidden behind complexity. Hedge funds stacked with derivatives. Shadow banks nobody regulates. Leveraged bets buried inside sophisticated algorithms. The instruments evolve. The danger doesn't. Too much risk. Too little transparency. Too much faith in models based on assumptions. Assumptions that crumble the moment reality deviates even a fraction of a percent. Once those assumptions fail, the system implodes exactly the way it did in 1929. Slowly, then suddenly. During the Great Depression, trust evaporated in layers. First markets, then banks, then institutions. Depositors lost sleep. Then they lost access. Then they lost everything. It got so bad the U.S. had to invent deposit insurance just to convince people not to hide their life savings under the floorboards. It worked for a while, but today the scale is on another planet. Banking is global. Contagion is instant. When Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 2023, fear jumped borders in hours, not months. The same psychology still lurks beneath the surface. Fear of invisible losses, fear of vanishing safety, fear of discovering your financial system is only as strong as collective belief. And that's what made 1929 so dangerous. It was psychological. Prosperity had become destiny. Progress was treated like a law of nature. When that belief shattered, people didn't just lose money, they lost the story they were living inside. Today is no different. For decades, we've been told central banks can smooth every downturn, that recessions are relics of the past, that the economy is a machine with a volume knob. But every rescue demands bigger tools, bigger interventions, bigger distortions. Every bailout plants the seed for the next crisis. Every fix injects more fragility into the foundation. And the world is even more interconnected than 100 years ago. In 1929, America's crash torpedoed European banks already drowning in war debt. Germany descended into chaos, resentment, and extremism. Economic pain spilled over into political U. Fast forward to now, global debt above $300 trillion. Financial systems fused together. A default in one country, a currency collapse in another, a failed bank on the other side of the world. Everything is tied together by invisible wires. The architecture is bigger. The risk is bigger. The cushion is thinner. Policymakers in 1929 thought confidence could be restored with speeches and symbolic moves. They misdiagnosed the disease. It wasn't panic. It was leverage. In the late 1920s, asset prices didn't rise. They detonated. Stocks shot so far beyond their fundamentals that reality became optional. And every expert, every commentator, every overconfident investor had the same rallying cry. This time is different. New industries, new technologies, New management, new policies. The future looked unstoppable, so the rules of risk were thrown out the window. Sound familiar? Because today, we're living through the same delusion, just with flashier logos and better marketing. Companies burning billions trade at sky-high valuations because the market believes growth will never slow, profits will magically appear, and economic gravity doesn't apply anymore. The names changed. RCA and Bethlehem Steel became Tesla and unprofitable startups, but the psychology hasn't moved an inch. Debt bubbles don't pop because people are stupid. They pop because confidence has an expiration date. And once confidence collapses, credit tightens, liquidity evaporates, and prices fall like they're made of glass. The only mystery is timing. In 1929, the crash struck like lightning, sharp, violent, catastrophic. Today, policy support might stretch the cycle, soften the edges, disguise the cracks. But math doesn't negotiate. If debt rises faster than income, repayment becomes fantasy. If growth depends entirely on expanding credit, stability becomes an illusion. And right now, we're rebuilding the same doomed structure of the 1920s, only this time at planetary scale. Look at inequality, the next echo of a century ago. Before the crash, wealth was concentrated. The rich speculated with leverage. The poor tried to survive on installment loans. When the market collapsed, the fallout wasn't equal. It never is. Today, that divide is even wider. The top 1% now controls more than half of global wealth. Asset inflation turbocharges the rich and leaves everyone else choking on rising costs. Wages stagnate. Debt fills the gap. The middle class feels richer when home prices rise, but that wealth is leveraged, borrowed, dependent on low rates and cheap money. When rates go up, the illusion fades and society strains. The Great Depression didn't just destroy wealth, it detonated politics, it birthed populism, nationalism, and protectionism. People turned inward, angry, suspicious, desperate for someone to blame. And today, that same anger simmers beneath the surface. Distrust in institutions, frustration with inequality, fear of change, a sense that the system is rigged and the game is unwinnable. Economic insecurity is the fuel of extremism, always has been, always will be. History doesn't whisper that lesson, it screams it. Then there's policy, another mirror image. In 1929, leaders tried austerity. They cut spending to restore confidence. It backfired spectacularly. Today, leaders sprint in the opposite direction. Unlimited spending, unlimited bailouts, unlimited money printing. And here's the irony, both extremes end the same way. Austerity leads to deflation and despair. Endless spending leads to inflation and decay. Sustainable prosperity lives somewhere in the middle, where debt funds productivity, not speculation. But political incentives don't reward long-term thinking. They reward fast wins, fast fixes, fast illusions. Speculation in the 1920s was visible, crowds watching ticker tapes outside brokerage houses. Speculation today is invisible, buried inside algorithms, derivatives, and digital trades executed faster than human comprehension. The speed is the danger, the velocity is the threat. When sentiment turns, it won't be a slow slide, it'll be a free fall. Markets will move before most people realize anything has started. But the most dangerous parallel isn't financial, it's psychological. Before every collapse, people feel the safest. In the 1920s, early sellers were mocked. In 2025, those warning about bubbles get ridiculed too. Confidence blinds, complacency grows. And then, one tiny fracture breaks the entire facade. A default, a failed bond auction, a liquidity freeze, and suddenly the entire system feels weightless, because the illusion that held it together evaporates instantly. But history isn't destiny. The lessons do exist, if anyone chooses to learn them. Diversify risk, challenge consensus. Remember that value is built on trust, and trust is built on discipline. Markets don't collapse because prices fall. They collapse because people forget why prices rose in the first place. In 1929, nobody imagined a decade of depression. In 2025, nobody imagines it either. And that's the danger. Familiarity breeds blindness. As debt climbs, speculation intensifies, and inequality widens, we must ask, are we truly wiser than the generations before us? Or are we simply making the same mistakes with better apps and faster computers? Because when the dust settled after 1929, it wasn't just portfolios that were wrecked, it was faith. Time has a way of repeating itself, especially when society refuses to listen. Back in 1929, the financial world was small enough to fit inside a single nation's panic. Today, one wrong move in Washington can rattle Frankfurt before lunch, punch Beijing by dinner, and make São Paulo tremble before the sun rises again. The global economy isn't a marketplace anymore. It's a spiderweb stretched across the entire planet. When one strand snaps, the vibration is felt everywhere. The interconnection we built to spread prosperity now acts like a high-speed amplifier of fear. Tiny disruptions become global earthquakes. Local issues become international crises. And the system designed to stabilize wealth now moves risk faster than it moves opportunity. The Great Depression proved something we still don't like to admit. When economics crack, politics mutates. Back then, collapsing markets didn't just empty bank accounts, they reshaped nations. Protectionism surged, nationalism hardened. People, scared and exhausted, turned toward strongmen who promised simple answers to complex problems. It wasn't just a financial breakdown, it was a social one. Look around today and tell me the parallels aren't screaming. Economic stress is once again feeding political extremes. Populism rises. Outrage replaces dialogue. Trust in democratic institutions erodes like old stone in the rain. And when people stop believing they have a fair shot, they stop playing by the rules. In 1933, that dynamic changed the world. In our era, the stakes are even higher. And just like the 1920s, our era is built on a myth. Back then, the myth was that markets could magically heal themselves. Today, the myth is that governments can always step in, always stabilize, always rescue. But arithmetic doesn't negotiate. You can't spend what you don't generate. You can't print your way out of reality. When debt grows faster than income, when speculation grows faster than production, when promises grow faster than truth. The ending is inevitable. The only thing that changes is how loudly the crash arrives. And as always, the real damage hits regular people first. In 1929, a Kansas farmer never imagined that bankers gambling with leverage in New York could wipe out his wheat prices. But when credit froze, his world fell apart. Today, the system is even more entangled. A rate hike in D.C. can kill a family's home-buying dream in Texas. A liquidity squeeze in Europe can end a job in Chicago. The feedback loop is faster now, the consequences sharper. Technology turned fear and greed into code, and code never sleeps. In the 1920s, ticker tape took minutes to transmit the truth. Now machines read the truth in microseconds. One hint of danger and algorithms unload billions. No hesitation, no emotion, no mercy. Humans panic in waves, but machines panic in avalanches. And yet, inside the chaos, there is always a thread of resilience. After 1929, the world rebuilt. Out of the ashes came reforms that reshaped modern finance. Innovation surged. Policies changed. Society evolved. The lesson was clear. Collapse forces adaptation. But by the time the lessons arrive, the cost has already been paid. Our generation has a chance to rewrite that cycle, but only if we act before the break, not after. We know the red flags. Exploding debt, inflated assets, widening inequality, dangerous overconfidence. We know the tools, smarter fiscal policy, productive investment, shared growth, but we lack the will, because it's always easier to delay, to borrow, to pretend the warning signs are just noise. History shows what denial costs. Before the 1929 crash, journalists celebrated tiny drops as healthy corrections. Politicians promised temporary turbulence. Bankers insisted the fundamentals were solid. And by the time they finally admitted what was happening, the fracture had already become a collapse. Today, the script feels identical. Markets still believe in gravity-defying valuations. Central banks still promise stability. Investors still trust the narrative. Meanwhile, pressure builds quietly, the same way it always does before history changes direction. Someday, future historians will study this moment. They'll ask the same chilling question we ask of 1929. How did they not see it coming? And the answer will be as tragic as it is familiar. They did. They just chose not to believe. And so here we are, standing on a familiar cliff with unfamiliar consequences. Growth slowing, debt accelerating, inequality boiling. Institutions straining under the weight of expectations they can't meet. Technology intensifying every tremor. The pattern is ancient. The packaging is modern. The stakes are higher than ever. Because when trust erodes, societies don't just stumble. They fracture. And rebuilding trust is far harder than rebuilding markets. So take a breath. Look at your own financial life, your savings, your risks, your opportunities, your blind spots. The ghost of 1929 isn't trapped in museum glass. It's floating in every decision to chase hype over fundamentals. Every moment society chooses comfort over truth. Every time speculation gets mistaken for progress. Crises never appear suddenly. They grow in silence, inside belief. And now the world faces a choice. If the conditions of 1929 marched straight into our decade, would we recognize them? Or has the modern system grown so oversized, so confident, so tangled, that it no longer sees the reflection staring back? Because the answer to that question will decide whether the next chapter becomes a renaissance or a reckoning. And if you're still here, if this shifted your perspective, then don't just walk away. Join the conversation. Challenge the narrative. Question everything. This channel exists for people who refuse to sleepwalk through financial history. If you want deeper breakdowns, sharper insights, and the truth behind the money myths shaping your future, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and step into the circle of people who see the storm before it hits. Because history isn't done, it's loading the next chapter.